Greetings and welcome to the 2021 University Studying Slavery Conference. My name is Adana Johnson and I serve as Associate Vice President for Student Equity and Inclusion at Georgetown University. While Georgetown's Slavery, Memory, and Reconciliation Initiative in the Office of the President is the virtual host for this year's conference, we extend gratitude to the entire consortium who engage in this important work. The atrocities of enslavement and dehumanization and oppression of African people is a painful history, and as we embark upon this year's conference, we have an agonizing awareness of these vestiges as we have before us, week after week, examples of terrorization and slaying of Black bodies in cities all over the United States. We cannot approach this work from purely an academic perspective, as this is not a moribund practice or set of ideals, but racism, anti-Blackness, and oppression are thriving and must be cut out. And we can only cut them out by facing the realities of the gross, inhumane inequities that exist in us as individuals and who exist in systems throughout our country, including our institutions of higher education. Furthermore, the conference is held in conjunction with Emancipation Day in the District of Columbia, which marks the April 16th, 1862 signing of the DC Compensated Emancipation Act, which ended slavery in Washington, DC. One session will explore the case for DC statehood, highlighting both the impact of the continued denial of democracy for DC residents and the progress toward full representation. Relatedly, it is paramount that in addition to examining the roots of enslavement, that we interrogate our current context, the identities of those who lead, teach, learn, and provide services of food and cleaning. Are we spending time and resources on the study of slavery while our institutions make decisions or enact policies that perpetuate bias and discrimination against the descendants of the enslaved? What is the nature of the climate of our institutions for staff, students, faculty, and administrators who identify as Black? What impact do our institutions have on the neighborhoods and communities where we are situated? Have we fostered gentrification or economic erosion for Black citizens? These are difficult questions about the historical and present-day effects of slavery, which we seek to interrogate during our time over the next 2 days. Before we began a conference grappling with enslavement and the present-day remains and consequences, we believe the pouring of libation to be in order. Libation is a ritual done all over the world, but originated in Africa. We acknowledge the Creator and then offer a drink to our sacred ancestors, humans present and humans yet to come. As we acknowledge these sacred forces and people, we ask that you join in call and response after each statement. Respond with Ashe, which is a Yoruba Nigerian word that has deep translation, but essentially means it is well, or so be it. Though we are in a virtual format today, I invite you to join me in the call and response. You're welcome now to take a deep breath and get centered for this remembrance. We give thanks to the Almighty Creator, God, the Great Spirit, Ashe. For the motherland, Africa, the cradle of civilization, Ashe. We call upon our ancestors, far and near, known and unknown, to continue to inspire us to make progress and achieve morally and socially at our highest potential, Ashe. We honor and express gratitude for the lives of those who died in the Middle Passage, who were forced to toil on plantations from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, Ashe. For those who fought and died for the abolition of slavery, Ashe. For those who were enslaved even though they converted and worshiped the same God as their oppressors, Ashe. We honor those who were subjugated with the justification of so-called science and anthropology, medicine, psychology, sociology, and beyond. Ashe. We honor those who protested and were murdered in the pursuit of civil rights, human rights. Ashe. We pay respect to those whose Black lives were brutally taken while sleeping, walking, shopping, driving, worshiping. Ashe. We offer drink and breath to those who most recently were mercilessly killed only because they were Black. We send light to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, Layleen Polanco, Tony McDade, and Dante Wright. Ashe. We call upon our collective ancestors of great determination, brilliance, creativity, courage, and strength to be with us. We call upon the spirits of Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, Ida B. Wells, Carter G. Woodson, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Josephine Baker, Toni Morrison, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Audre Lorde, Elizabeth Catlett, Mary Church Terrell, Medgar Evers, Benjamin Banneker. Ashe. We lift up our youth who represent the promise for tomorrow, who with fervor and passion point our moral compass in the right direction. Ashe. For those yet unborn, may they bring greater good to our world. Ashe. And finally, to those of us who have virtually gathered here today, we honor our honest engagement in the pursuit of facing our history and fostering true emancipation for humanity. Ashe, ashe, asheo. Thank you. I now turn to Dr. John J. DeGioia, the 48th president of Georgetown University.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson, for opening our convening. And good morning, everyone. We're honored to have all of you with us and to again be hosting the university's Studying Slavery Conference at Georgetown. The work in which all of you are engaged at your home institutions and through the university's Studying Slavery Consortium is helping to bring forth the very best of what it means to be a university. We live every day with the legacies of enslavement, from health disparities, police violence, and mass incarceration, to monuments in our physical landscape and the materials in our archives. Over the course of these next 2 days, we'll be engaging these issues, exploring the national context and our history here at Georgetown and in Washington, D.C. As Dr. Johnson just shared with us, tomorrow we mark D.C. Emancipation Day, which recognizes the end of slavery in 1862 here in the District of Columbia, with a panel on the cause of DC statehood, a step long overdue in moving us closer to realizing the founding promise of our nation. As we begin today, I'd like to especially recognize Melisande Short Colon, a descendant of Abraham Mahoney and Mary Ellen Queen, who were enslaved on Jesuit plantations and sold in 1838. Our university benefited from their enslaved labor and from this sale of more than 272 children, women, and men. Her original performance of Here I Am will premiere this afternoon, and in our session tomorrow, we'll reflect further on the possibilities of art and performance in advancing justice. For those of us here at Georgetown, for our community and the communities of descendants of Jesuit slaveholding, we continue to build, we continue to engage. We recognize that there is more for us to do together on the journey towards reconciliation. And I'm grateful to the descendants who are able to join us today. In our first conversation this morning, we're invited to reflect on a path toward reconciliation. And we're honored to have with us Mr. Joseph Stewart and Reverend Timothy Kisicki. Mr. Stewart is a fifth-generation grandson of Isaac Hawkins, for whom Isaac Hawkins Hall here at Georgetown is named. The Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, which Mr. Stewart and Father Kisicki helped to establish, is dedicated to the advancement of descendants of Jesuit slaveholding and racial healing in our country. And I wish to thank both of them for taking the time to engage our university's studying slavery colleagues and our community here at Georgetown in conversation on this transformative new work. I wish to thank all of you again for being with us. It's an honor for Georgetown to play this role. And I'll now turn over to my colleague, Dr. Joseph Ferrara, who will introduce our first panel.
Great, thank you, Jack. Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Ferrara. I am Vice President and Chief of Staff here at Georgetown University. And I'm very pleased today to be able to welcome and introduce Mr. Joe Stewart and Father Tim Kisicki, who will be our first panel discussion. Let me provide a brief introduction of Joe and Tim. And then what I'm going to do is turn to them for them to share their reflections. We'll go to Joe first, then to Tim, and then we'll have time for some questions. We only have up till 11 when I know the next panel begins. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. So let me briefly introduce our two guests. As Jack said, Joe is a fifth-generation grandson of Isaac Hawkins and has been a leader in the community of descendants of Jesuit slaveholding. Joe was born in Maringouin, Louisiana, as a graduate of Southern University in Louisiana. He served in senior positions at the Kellogg Foundation, including as a board trustee for many years. Joe also co-founded Stewart Industries, an automotive systems company. And Joe serves on the board of the recently established Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, which we will discuss today. Father Tim Kisicki is the president of the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States. Tim also serves on the board of the New Reconciliation Foundation and on other boards, including the Board of Jesuit Refugee Services. Earlier in his career, Tim served as the provincial of what was then the Chicago-Detroit province of the Society of Jesus in the United States, and also as president of St. Ignatius High School in Cleveland. Tim is a graduate of John Carroll University in Ohio. Let me now turn to Joe and Tim, and again, we'll start with Joe for his reflections, then we'll go to Tim, and then we'll have time for questions. So Joe, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ferrara. And let me begin by expressing our thanks and appreciation to all universities studying slavery that's in attendance here today. Please know that Father Kisicki and I do appreciate this opportunity to share the story of a unique, high potential, and sustainable partnership. As a descendant, we appear before you today to confess that there is a troubling conflict, and this is going on inside of me. A troubling conflict taking place between my head on one hand and my heart on the other hand. My head is urging me to be very polite. It's telling me to say that we are honored to be here today. But that heart of mine is telling my head, this is not the complete truth. The complete truth is that I don't know any descendant of enslaved people that would not wish that the history you are studying would have been a different history, would have been a history without bondage, a history without oppression, pain, and suffering that were imposed upon our ancestors' humanity. That you would be calling your study, your research, would be calling a history where equality, equity, and justice were realities for our ancestors and not just faraway dreams. Dreams in the 17th and 18th century that continue to evade those of us who are alive today in 2021. This is why I'm saying Father Kisicki and I are really very appreciative of your invitation. But more importantly, to us, we are grateful for the much needed opportunity to encourage all of you and other institutions like yours who are great beneficiaries of slavery to consider partnering with us in our effort to uplift those who were so downtrodden. Partner with us as we simultaneously heal, reconcile, transform our nation from an ugly past to the realization of we're the people. At this time, please allow me to introduce my cousins who are with me. You may not be able to see them, but it's Carolyn Branch and Earl Williams Sr. Carolyn is a founding member and the current president of the Descendants Association. In 2018, Carolyn, Earl, and I were selected from among 15 leaders of 3 separate descendant groups. Our marching order was to pursue the unification of all descendants of ancestors enslaved by the Society of Jesus in the United States. In continuing that mission, the 3 of us became the association's foundation leadership committee. Over the past 3 years, we have engaged in a series of truth, racial healing, and transformation convenings with the Jesuits and with the support, the important support of Georgetown's leadership. These convenings led us to signing a memorandum of understanding that guided the development of our Descendant Jesuit partnership, a partnership that has now been converted into 2 standalone 501c3 organizations. First is the Irrevocable Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Trust, and then a separate 501c3, Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. The foundation is the sole beneficiary of the trust. Father Kisicki and I are indeed excited to share with you our billion-dollar vision. We believe this unique partnership between Descendants and Jesuits may well offer tremendous value to all of you, to all universities and institutions that have benefited from slavery. But first, allow me to share the rocky road that I, Carolyn Branch, and Earl Hawkins Williams Sr., and other descendants have walked just to be with you today. I'm a 5th generation, as Dr. DeGioia said, a 5th generation grandson of Isaac Hawkins, who was enslaved by the Jesuits in Maryland. To our knowledge, over the past 6 generations, Earl and I are among more than 1,200 grandchildren of Grandpa Isaac. We and all other descendants only began to discover this information about 5 years ago. Can you imagine that? And let me tell you, knowing your whole life that you descended from enslaved people is one thing, but knowing the details of your own ancestors is yet another thing entirely, especially when you learn that your ancestors were owned and sold like property, owned and sold by a faith-based institution that has been the bedrock of your faith for your entire life. Throughout America and even around the world, descendants like the 3 of us found out these painful details at about the same time. And we came together with an intent to engage in meaningful change to uplift future generations and to help heal a diseased world. Like so many things in life, it was a strange blurring of the awful and the sublime. Here we were, connecting with our ancestors from the past, learning their names and seeing them scrolled on a bill of sale, and in some cases, even seen their faces. It brought their pain and the inhumane treatment they lived dead center in our own lives. But at the same time, here we were, finding new family in the present, people who shared our past, our DNA, and our pain at discovering what felt like a betrayal. And yet at the same time, experiencing a feeling of joy at simply discovering each other for the first time. At our Descendants Association family reunion, more than 400 descendants attended. And let me tell you, that first reunion in almost 200 years was a joy for us for the ages. First, we came together to make sense of it all. Some of our ancestors had shared small single-room cabins. They looked after each other's children, and they tried to protect each other from abusive slave masters. Others of our ancestors had been torn from their own families and sold away for profit to faraway places. I ask each of you, can you feel me? Try to feel what we all felt. It was a lot, and still is a lot, for us to process. But after you have thought on something for long enough, you reach a point where the only answer is to take action. So we did. We took action. In May of 2017, several of us sent a petition to the top Jesuit in Rome. We asked for a commitment from the Society of Jesus to pursue atonement and to invest proportionately in the future of descendants of those enslaved by the Jesuits. In less than 2 months, we received the only mention of our ancestors that were sold in 1838 that had been documented during the past 176 years. Before that, it was said that all, mind you, every one of our ancestors had succumbed to fever in the melodious swamps of Louisiana. Yet after 176 years, our letter from Superior General Arturo Sosa said, quote, "We have sinned against God and betrayed the dignity of your ancestors." This letter began the dialogue that marked the beginning of our pathway to a descendant-Jesuit partnership. However, before engaging with the Jesuits, descendants had already decided that the deal we wanted was not for us individually. We wanted our Jesuit brothers to make $1 billion investment in supporting the educational aspirations of descendants and making a major commitment to dismantling the institutional remnants of slavery while promoting racial healing throughout America. And we wanted it to be sustained for generations. This work, these objectives, are at the heart of our Descendant Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. We believe that transformation in America must be achieved. We believe it is the only sustainable way to lead our nation away from the destructive legacy of white supremacy, racism, and unprovoked hatred. It is the only way to repair the breach in our one humanity and to halt the crumbling of our fragile democracy. The descendants have never sought, even from the beginning, to place blame on today's Jesuits for the sins of their predecessors. Nor have we sought to disrupt the great mission at Georgetown University just because of the salvation they received from the sale of our ancestors. But, and I emphasize but we descendants today and descendants in the future do hold present and future Jesuit leadership, and do hold present and future leadership at Georgetown and all slaveholding institutions. We hold you accountable for investing in positive and transformative change in our nation. We believe education provides our greatest opportunity to improve generation over generation. And together, not just descendants and Jesuits, but all of us can help build a sustainable infrastructure to carry on a 100-year vision of transformation. We believe there's opportunity and room in our promising vision for all slaveholding institutions, for philanthropy, for business, and for all people of goodwill, people who wish to be committed to the greater common good of all of God's children. And let me say that our existing partnership is fully aware of the work and the progress that higher education has done to help our nation understand the legacy of institutional bondage. Excuse me. And we also recognize your work, the work you've done to make visible the ugly curse of racism that has so deeply infected our nation. We recognize and applaud your contributions. But we have come this morning to suggest that universities studying slavery have the potential to take the great knowledge and understanding you have outside of the realms of academia. I respectfully suggest that we already know more than we do. Historically, we have stored and saved knowledge on shelves and not put it on streets and in communities and in transformation. Isn't it time to turn what we know into effective real-world actions to bring about systemic changes? We understand that universities are houses of learning and theory. As such, you are a tremendous force for good in the world. That is what your missions entail. In fact, education is the cornerstone of actions our foundation will undertake every day. But without focused and sustainable actions, knowledge alone cannot and will not uplift our society. We also understand that a great part of the important work you do is around truth telling. And there cannot be healing in our nation without a shared understanding that truth comes first. But if higher education continues to thrust to learn more and continues to do so little with what we already know, I submit to you that you are underutilizing the potential and the responsibility to help resolve critical problems in our over and everyday troubled world. This case in point is clear. While studies and research is being conducted on our nation's legacy of slavery, Black and brown Americans living in the present are being killed every day in our bedrooms, in our churches, on our streets, in cars, and in every nook and cranny all over this country. After 400 years, we are still being dehumanized and diminished by systemic racism and hate. While studying slavery is happening inside the hollow walls of our institutions of higher education. The in-your-face hanging gallows that was erected on the hollow grounds of the US Capitol speaks loudly to us that we must take more constructive, meaningful, and impactful actions. We understand that studies do matter, so don't misunderstand me. And that we understand that they are necessary inside your walls. But Black, Brown, Native American, and Asian American and Pacific Islanders are in pain and almost under siege in the country we helped build. It seems every little progress toward justice, and you see it as I see it all around us, every little progress toward justice and equality in our nation is confronted almost immediately with some new mutation of institutional racism. Today's mutation we all see and hear in the news is a massive move in acts of voter suppression. Earl and I are honored to have a hall at Georgetown named after our fifth generation grandpa, Isaac Hawkins. That was a great gesture. But it must be said that while many universities studying slavery, not just Georgetown, are honoring our ancestors with statues and symbols, their grandchildren are alive today, and they are 34% less likely to hold a college degree than a white counterpart, and a whole lot less able to pay for college. They are 37% more likely to die of COVID, 40% less likely to own a home, 5 times more likely to be imprisoned. While studying and erecting monuments to the past, present-day conditions are writing today's descendants' future into the stones. And these carvings are not the future that today's descendants deserve, not in 2021, and most certainly not in 3031. As large institutions with tremendous resources, with trusted voices, and with a stated commitment to the truth, you have a timely opportunity through strategic actions and investments to lead a cultural change that is long overdue in America. In this regard, let us reflect on words spoken by a student body president or the student body president at Brown University in a recent Boston Globe article. This young man said, and I quote, "Studying the issue is lovely, but how does that rectify what happened? Because it's not just descendants who want actions, it's your student bodies who understand better than any generation alive why positive and constructive action, not apologies, not studies, not monuments, is what institutions really need. They are the full impact and change makers. When we created the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, we reserved 2 permanent seats on our governing board for slaveholding institutions, for your impact, your knowledge, and your actions. This we did because we knew slaveholding institutions must be partners in this work of rectifying the past that they helped create. We also saw institutions all around us struggling to come up with their exclusive on-campus approaches to addressing the same legacy of slavery that is common to many other institutions of higher education. There's a lot of people, a lot of systems that benefited from education. I suspect some of the reason, though, we see too much of the symbolic and too little of meaningful is because your individual struggle to get right and to balance all of the complexities involved here. We understand the dilemma. We're sympathetic to the dilemma. That is why our organization exists as a descendant-led means to unify and coordinate a pathway for all to engage in a collective and coordinated force that reaches outside of our campuses. We believe our descendant Jesuit vision offers all who benefited from slavery a collective means and opportunity to help create a better future for all who help build this nation. And we believe that together we can do just this. We can accomplish it all. We can build a world where we know and honor the names of people whose humanity was denied and abused. We can study and understand the why and the how of slavery and bondage. But together, we can change the course of the future. We can do so by doing what is good, doing what is necessary, doing what is right for present and future generations of those who were so wronged in our history. We all here today, descendants of enslaved people and leaders of some of the most noted and prestigious institutions of higher education in the world. Together, we must act to prevent the man-made disease of racism and hate from infecting our children, our grandchildren, and their children. I hope you will become our partner in this pathway forward. Thank you for considering my message. And I now turn it over to Dr. Ferrara.
Great, thank you, Joe. And I'm going to thank you very much for that. And I think that provides a very rich background context. Let me now quickly turn to Father Kisicki to share his reflections, and then we'll get to a few questions before we wrap up. Tim?
I'd like to offer my thanks to all of you for welcoming us today, and especially Mr. Joe Stewart for his very inspiring words. The Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation is a one-of-a-kind ministry for the Jesuit order, and one that is deeply rooted in our history. It is and has been a privilege for me to accompany Mr. Joseph Stewart, Ms. Sherilyn Branch, and Mr. Earl Williams, descendant leaders whose wisdom and vision has made all of this possible. I'm also grateful to Georgetown University, who first engaged members of the descendant community, especially Doctors Jack DeGioia, Joe Ferrara, and Adna Johnson. Together, we have embraced a journey of truth, racial healing, and transformation. In April of 2016, I was attending a meeting of Jesuit provincial superiors in Antananarivo, Madagascar. During an afternoon session, the New York Times story, 272 were sold to save Georgetown, what does it owe their descendants, appeared online. By the end of that session, each of the African provincial superiors had read the story. Even though I was 9,000 miles away from Washington, D.C., where I live, I was face to face with African Jesuits who wanted to know, how are the Jesuits going to respond? 5 years later, as you have just heard, we have a unique opportunity to unify and coordinate a path forward in dismantling the legacy, the lasting legacy of slavery in the United States. In 2017, around Emancipation Day on the campus of Georgetown University, I formally apologized for the sin of Jesuit slaveholding in the United States. In order to atone for this sin, both in word and deed, I was clear in my apology that we resisted moving on, but embraced moving forward in hope. The process forward has been arduous, beset by much pain and suffering, but it continues to move forward. In 2018, the Jesuit Superior General in Rome responded to the petition of descendant leaders and entrusted a formal dialogue process to the Jesuit provincials of the United States through the structure of the Jesuit Conference, which I lead. The first step in that process was a relationship between Joe Stewart and me, which has grown into a very fruitful partnership. Joe Stewart was one of the 4 signers on a petition to Rome, asking the Jesuits to respond to this history. The petitioners recognized that in the 19th century, it was the Jesuit order who held and sold their enslaved ancestors, not Georgetown University as it is currently incorporated. They came to the Jesuits to atone for this tragic sin. The dialogue process began, as you heard, with an open invitation to the 3 descendant groups that existed in 2018 and the US Jesuits to engage the W.K. Kellogg Foundation to lead us in a process of truth, racial healing, and transformation. Early in the process, both descendants and Jesuits selected representative leadership to engage the dialogue. For the Jesuits, it was the US Jesuit provincials. We did this with the support of leadership at Georgetown University. Let me now share what I think are the 3 key components of our shared vision. First, the vision is descendant-led. This history of Jesuit slaveholding is not a secret. Much has been written about it. It was not until we met living descendants, though, that we embarked on a collective path of reconciliation. While we did not run to the descendants at first, when they invited us into this vision and partnership, we said yes. They challenged us to follow them and not embark on our own project or program. We caved to the fundamental understanding that descendant leadership is what made this partnership unique and transformative. Second, it had to be an equal partnership. The descendant leaders acknowledged that US Jesuits had a strong tradition of faith and justice in this country. They did not want us to stop the good work that we were already doing. But they also said that they were not interested in our charity and existing initiatives. Unless we were equal partners in something new, little would change. By creating a new foundation that we invested in, we could not only create a new institution, but be a model of unity and partnership. And third, this vision had to be bold, innovative, and sustainable. The billion-dollar vision of the foundation is bold, but the money is only part of it. The vision is innovative because it is not an investment in buildings or projects, it is an investment in people. This partnership between the descendants of the enslaved and the descendants of the enslavers is indeed a new pathway forward in a country that this day is plagued with racial unrest. And a trust and foundation whose assets will continue to grow will not serve just one generation, but many. In her recent New York Times bestseller, The Sum of Us, Heather McGhee's concluding chapter is titled The Solidarity Dividend. She calls for a national effort rooted in community that brings us together. She then highlights truth, racial healing, and transformation, or TRHT as we call it, as a model for such a process. The TRHT framework was developed in 2016 by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation after studying truth and reconciliation processes across the globe. Such an effort requires a gathering of a representative group of people. The framework involves a process of relationship building and healing by sharing personal stories. But it doesn't just help people to talk about race. It must lead to transformation. This is the framework that Descendant and Jesuit leaders used over the past 3 years. The Descendant Truth and Reconciliation Foundation is our commitment to transformation. We believe that done effectively, it will yield a significant solidarity dividend for the United States and can serve as a model for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to go to questions now, and we have, I've been monitoring questions that are coming in. I know we only have about 15 minutes left. And I think as I looked at the questions, I think they really resolve into sort of three categories. So what I might do is try to pose to Joe and Tim 2 or 3 questions that I hope will capture a lot of the themes in the limited time that we have left. So let me start with one. I'll pose 3 questions. The first one is, Joe and Tim, and particularly Joe, you've talked about descendants coming together into this dialogue process and various descendant groups and seeking a process where the descendants could come together as a community. We are hearing from some members of the descendant community that did not feel involved in the process that led to the creation of the foundation, and that are wondering how can their voices be heard as we go forward in this process. And I wonder, Joe, if you could address that question. Joe, you're on mute.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The
Go ahead.
core, it strikes me that the core of that question is, how can their voices be heard? I think that's what I pulled out of your question.
Yes.
And it's important to emphasize that what we started to do 5 years ago that has evolved into what we are today has always been an open process. It has always been a process that encouraged all descendants of ancestors enslaved by the Jesuits to be a part of this. That door remains open. And the way to become involved is to come through the organized structures. We cannot respond to single voices coming over the transit, but if people would get involved and bring their concerns to the Descendants Association through the democratically structured process for input and representation, I can guarantee anyone interested in having their voice heard, coming through the right channels, the voice will not only be heard, but will be dealt with in the governance process.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for that. Let me go to a second sort of, so there's this question of voices of the descendant community, and I think you've just touched on how people can engage. And I know that you have been doing a lot of engagement with members of the descendant community as we go forward. Let me turn to sort of the second thematic question. And I think I'll start with Joe and maybe Tim, and then one more question, which I'll turn to Tim on. Several questions came in, Joe, your call for university studying slavery, understanding a university's mission of education and research. And I think people heard the call you were making that education and research is a very positive mission, but we also need you to do more. We need you to get involved, and the foundation is a way for you to do that. And some of our universities are asking, what are some examples of where universities could step up and do more to address the current legacies of slavery and segregation? So let me turn that question to Joe, and Tim, please chime in if you want to add anything.
Let me say, and this is an honest, descendant, heartfelt response. We have created this vision that we think can deliver solidarity dividends, as Father Kisicki said. And the way we think, the first way, is to become a part of what we're doing. Don't continue to create your own, what I call internal answers and systems that self-deal within universities. Come outside and become a part of a fresh new move and vision that together, collectively, will involve all of the learning and knowledge that you have, but will focus it through a foundation to those goals and objectives that we've said. So the first, to be perfectly frank up front, we need the resources and support to help continue to build out this vision, to take us from $1 billion vision to a $5 billion vision. Can you imagine that $5 billion visions put in excess of $250 million a year into a single focus education, racial healing, transformation movement in this country? This is something that don't exist. We would hope that universities studying slavery would move away from the things you're doing on campus and join with us as a partner in the things we together can do in a greater society.
Thank you, Joe. Tim, I will, first of all, Tim, if you want to comment on that question, let me give you that opportunity. And
Well,
then
I want to say, very practically speaking, my work moving forward will be capitalizing this foundation. We have contracted CCS, a major fundraising organization. They led the campaign for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Already they're in the study phase of this campaign. We're hearing a lot of interest in this because it is bold, new, and innovative. And we encourage everyone to look seriously at this. This is a partnership that can extend beyond one moment in history, and it can be a model for truth and racial healing. And so that level of support is very important to us.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, let me come back to you. Another theme, again, I'm trying to pick themes from the various questions that are coming in. Obviously, you are a member of the Society of Jesus and a representative of the Catholic Church. One theme in some of the questions is, how can we think about this movement moving beyond the Catholic Church to other faith-based institutions that share histories of enslavement and oppression? I wonder what your reflections are on that when you think of this beyond the Catholic Church and think more broadly across faith-based institutions.
But when I think historically, I think Congregationalists, Baptists, Presbyterians, Anglican, Episcopal, those denominations founded a number of the institutions that would be present in the group university studying slaveholding. And so it's very clear that slaveholding and Christianity were synonymous in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries of the United States. And so this is as much a faith question as it is an academic or an institutional question. And we are engaging the Catholic Church in our own denomination, Roman Catholics. Our bishops have an ad hoc committee on racism. Mr. Stewart and I have presented to the leadership of that committee. We've presented to the Black bishops in the United States, and we are trying to engage our church more because we are part of a larger history here. And we hope that faith-based institutions who share in this history will also study their connection and, God willing, their commitment to this pathway forward.
Thank you very much.
Joe, may
Joe,
I
go
add
ahead.
something? May I add something to the question about what can we do? I was remiss in not inviting everybody on this call to go to Descendants.org. And please study our website. It will answer a lot of questions for you. We've tried to deal with that. And let me say this, I saw a chat question, why are we reluctant to talk about the foundation? We're not reluctant to talk about the foundation. It has been thoroughly laid out on the Descendants, on the Descendants.org website. So I invite you to go there.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I did see some of those questions. There is the website, Descendants.org. It describes the history. It describes some of the process that Joe and Tim have alluded to this morning. It also describes the board of trustees. I think we had one question in the chat about that. And you can go and see the board. As Joe says, it does include positions from slaveholding and other higher education institutions. Obviously, there are several members of the descendant community, and the Jesuit community on the board, as well as members of the board who represent other institutions in American society. And I think that is part of the idea, is a broad-based representation. We are about out of time. I guess I would maybe wrap it with a question for Joe and Tim is, what do you see as sort of, your immediate next steps as you go forward? Obviously, part of that is continuing to get the word out as you're doing here today. But when you think about the structure of the foundation, capitalizing the foundation, moving to a point where the foundation can begin to actually give grants and so forth, let me just ask each of you in closing to reflect on next steps.
Father?
Tim, do you want to go ahead? I think Joe's handing to you.
Yes, I can go first. As I said, the capitalizing of the foundation, we're also in the build out, the very clear build out of the foundation structure, because this is new. So these are very clear, important next steps, and sharing the word of this. We're grateful for the press we've received so far and the public announcement, which is not just US but global. And we hope to not limit this conversation just to the United States, because we believe this history is bigger than the United States. And especially coming from a global order like the Jesuits, how do we engage other countries in this question?
And I'll add to what Father said. We are now in what we call the implementation stage. He referred to it as the build out. In order for us to begin programming, once we have all of the capital in place and it begins to generate 5 to 7% per year out of the trust, and then it will be distributed to the foundation, we anticipate that we're in at least a 3 years, max 5-year build out plan. And that is what is very important to us now, the fundraising. Having the capital, having the trust capitalized is priority number one. We're already talking about how do we develop the professional staff to run this. We intend to put in place a world-class foundation with professional management and all of the related accountabilities to be a high-performing 501c3 organization. We're in the process of doing that now. That won't be Father Kisicki and I.
Joe, thank you very much. And I know we're at time. I want to thank Joe Stewart and Tim Kisicki for their reflections this morning. I want to thank our participants for being here and for their questions. And I hope I was able to at least capture some of the main themes of the questions in the limited time we had. I now invite you to go to our next session on these grounds, creating research and archival tools to aid scholars, students, and the public. And we hope to see you at the next session. Thanks again to everyone.